Hello, this is the Tonic podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Drew, accompanied and joined by my friend and co-host, Alex. Alex, hello, how are you doing?
Hey, what's up, Drew? I'm doing okay. How about you?
I'm doing all right. We had to re-record this intro because of police sirens out in Alex's neighborhood. They were incredibly loud. So this is take two. And so this week we are going to be talking about the developments in the political campaign, the 2020 United States political campaign for president. The big thing is Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race. Now we see that Joe Biden is the presumptive nominee. There is no current challenger at this time to that position. So it looks like if all goes well for Biden, he's going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party for the 2020 presidential race. So now we're going to kind of be discussing the transition from this primary-oriented part of the race to now the general, right? Biden no longer has to worry about picking up states. He is the de facto victor on every ballot. And now he's looking towards November, looking towards Trump, looking towards the general, looking towards people that aren't registered with a party. And we're going to be discussing his strategies, how this presidential campaign might look similar or different from his previous attempts, because this is his third attempt at being president, and kind of going into his leadership skills versus Trump, a lot of things. Basically, the general election in general that we're going to be touching on today. So initially, Alex, what are your thoughts about, Bernie Sanders dropping out and how Biden's looking forward?
Well, so first I just want to wish everyone a happy Easter holiday. I hope everyone's, trying to make the best of the situation, whether it's Zooming your relatives or maybe you're home with your relatives. But I hope everyone's staying safe and happy. I hear the sirens again going by my house. Don't worry, I am safe. It's just every day at 8 o'clock they do something basically where there's kind of an action of solidarity between the people and the police over what's going on. So it's kind of nice, but also quite loud and annoying. So
not ideal for recording a podcast. Yeah.
But yes, so other than Easter, I think it's been an interesting week politically outside of coronavirus talks. Obviously, there's a lot of things that have happened with that, but it's true that I think this was the perfect time for Bernie to drop out, right? A lot of the primaries have been postponed. Biden has now won Alaska's primary, and, Bernie just wasn't doing too well. The problem is on social media and over just a lot of news sites, I've just seen a lot of angry Bernie supporters and a lot of people that are just, in general, just unhappy about this option they've been left with, which is Joe Biden. And I think there's some warrant to it. He's definitely not an exciting candidate, and his age is going to be a question. And the gaffes, he's always been a gaffe guy, but his amount of gaffes now are really accumulating. And I think there's a lot of people questioning if he is mentally and physically fit to be the president of the United States if he did beat Trump. So, I'm seeing a lot of parallels with 2016 right now. Not all of them, because obviously these are two very different candidates. But I think it's kind of a milquetoast option that a lot of voters are left with, and we're just going to have to see if turnout is enough to really help Biden get past Trump. And right now, I'm just really not sure. I do think that Trump has a concise message, which is, we're going to make America great, America first. Trump's a man of simple slogans that work. And I think I've talked to a lot of Democrats, and I don't think many people can really tell me what Biden stands for and what he's about. Yes. And I'm a little bit worried that Trump is going to really eat him alive with that. And I just don't know if I'd even want to see a debate between Trump and Biden, because I don't know what we would get.
Yeah. So to go back on that, when you talked about Bernie Sanders dropping out, it was the right time. Even if you're a fan of Bernie, the writing was on the wall. He lost key states like Michigan. There was no way that he was going to there was no foreseeable way that he was going to pull back any of the delegates he needed to, even have a contested convention, let alone be the nominee himself. So Bernie Sanders dropping out makes sense. He also did it at a good time because his idea was, okay, if I'm not going to win, I'm going to stay in and at least push my agenda. Well, if all the primaries have moved and no debates are happening and everyone's at home, you can't really push your agenda. You can't even have rallies. You can't even have campaign meetings. So it made sense that he couldn't even do what he wanted to do, even knowing he wasn't going to win. So he bowed out. So it makes sense. It's unfortunate for Sanders supporters. It was interesting to see in his stream that Bernie Sanders dropped out that he said, Joe Biden is a decent man, and I will be doing all I can to push my progressive agenda with him, going into November. It wasn't like a full-on endorsement of now I want my supporters to shift to Joe Biden, but it was definitely kind of, saying he's a decent man and I'm going to push my agenda with his campaign. It was interesting to see, and I think that Bernie Sanders understands the rationality behind getting behind Biden to go against Trump. I don't think his supporters do in the same way, though. I think a lot of supporters, there's a lot of Bernie or bust people that highly dislike Biden. And yeah, I think you kind of got into why he doesn't necessarily have a consistent message. The only consistent message I've gotten from Biden that's like, is, we need to beat Trump. Well, yeah, no, duh. I mean, every Democrat thinks that. I don't think any Democrat, everyone on the left thinks that. And you're right. I don't think his message or his, there's not like a clear cut through line. He doesn't have that good slogan, like you said, like "Make America Great," or now I think it's "Keep America Great." Right? I'm not sure what Trump has landed on as far as his slogans, but you're right that Trump has always had "America First," "Make America Great Again," key simple slogans that people can get behind. Joe Biden doesn't really have "I'm with Joe," "I'm with her." It doesn't work. And so, yeah, I do see a lot of parallels to 2016 where the Democratic Party has kind of put up a quote unquote what they think is safe candidate. And in reality, it's not. I mean, the reality is if you want a great reward requires great risk. And the Democratic Party has never been willing to put up great risk.
Right. No, I think that's very well put, and obviously I don't think the GOP at the time wanted Trump. And that was a clear risk. But obviously Trump ended up, winning. And definitely the party took a large risk,
Sure.
going behind him. And you're right. I think the DNC and just the Democratic Party in general is playing this very safe at a time when I don't think it's a good idea to play safe. And going into it, I think you're right that Bernie really did have a very big impact on, I think, these last two elections in not success and not in victory, but in really changing the tone and really changing the discussion of what is important to the Democratic Party. And, you could argue that's either good or bad, depending where you lean. But he did bring up a conversation that was very grassroots, and he almost made more of democratic socialism popular for a new generation.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's very cool, and I'm just curious, though. I'm curious what Joe Biden is going to do next, because obviously this pandemic is stealing the limelight. But he's already said that he's going to start shifting and embracing some of Bernie's plans, like expanding Medicaid and Medicare. And I just feel like before a general election, you try to go more to the center to bring out most voters, right? But with him going more left, I'm curious how that is going to work. Like, it seems a little too little, a little too late. And now I think it's just more of this contrast and who is he trying to get, And I mean, 538 does have a poll that they came out from the Morning Consult, and it did say that according to this poll, 82% of Sanders supporters did say they vote for Biden in the general election, and just 7% said they would vote for Trump. And a Quinnipiac University found that 86% of Sanders voters would vote for Biden too. And so, I mean, that is positive if those polls are correct, because we don't want, if you're a Democrat, you do not want Bernie supporters writing him in, voting for him if he's still on the ballot,
Right.
And so I think that is a positive, and I think it does show that a lot of people, like Bernie said, is a lot of people just don't want Trump. But we'll see how it goes. But I think you're right that Bernie did leave an impact. But I just don't know, because Joe doesn't have a very significant message, I'm worried that he's going to try to adopt more of Bernie's policies, and that might backfire too.
I don't think he'll go that. I mean, I think he's in this. Yeah, he's in a weird position where I think as far as the Democrat, he's not as left as the Democratic Party is in general. But he also knows that he needs to appeal to the middle of America, right? Politically and even geographically. He needs to appeal to the middle of America too. So that's why, of course, he'll never go for universal health care. He'll never go that far, but he'll make the small step like, yeah, I'll lower the minimum age requirement for, Medicare and Medicaid. David Axelrod, who was one of Obama's senior political strategists in 2008, he was on CNN recently talking about this as well, how the Trump's campaign will probably try to paint Biden as a democratic socialist. And he said, I think they'll have a harder time doing that than they would with Bernie. I mean, Bernie was self-proclaimed. If you told Bernie, are you a democratic socialist? He'd be like, yes, I am. I think they're going to have a hard time painting Biden as that. Like, it's going to be hard to group him up with the AOCs and the Bernies because he's really not. Mm-hmm. But he's just doing these small steps to try and appeal to maybe the more left progressive base. But what you just mentioned about how, over 80% of Bernie senators would still vote for Biden, that is encouraging for Biden's campaign. I'm sure they're glad to hear that. And as far as like national, CNN did a national poll. Now, of course, like any poll, there's a margin of error, and sample size and where it's being held is a factor. So of course, take it with a grain of salt. But a CNN poll did have Biden up above Trump in issues regarding crisis response, issues regarding like global leadership. The only one where Trump had a little bit better of a performance was dealing with the economy. But overall, there was more support for Biden than Trump on a national poll. Now, what was interesting was as far as those who did support those candidates, what was their enthusiasm about the candidate? Trump had about 70% of people who were voting for him were enthusiastic about it. They liked Trump. They want to vote for Trump. Only 50% of Biden's supporters were enthusiastic about it. And believe me, I'm in the other 50% camp. I'm probably going to be the guy that is going to swallow, take a big gulp and vote for Biden, but I'm not going to enjoy it. I'm not enthusiastic about Biden. And I think that's one of his main flaws is he doesn't have this enthusiastic grassroots movement like Bernie did. And he's going to try and absorb it. We'll see how well he absorbs it. But he's like you said earlier, it reminds me a lot of 2016. He's not I don't feel enthusiasm for Clinton, and I don't feel enthusiasm for Biden. They're not these like movement-oriented politicians. They're kind of these safe bet and milquetoast politicians that I don't think work anymore. And I want to start to go into history a little bit about, because we talked about this is his third attempt. This is Biden's third attempt. And I want to draw some parallels to why the first attempts didn't work and why maybe this attempt won't work. And one of it is his lack of filter when he speaks. In 88, when he first ran, he was 44 years old. He was a lot sharper, right? This was, people forget that he's had brain aneurysms in the 90s and brain surgery twice. This is before all that. He was quick and sharp and with his speeches, but he was still prone to gaffes. He was found to be in 88. He's found to plagiarize a speech from someone from the UK, almost verbatim, and he didn't realize it at the time, and he had to apologize later. He had gaffes where he overstated his successes in law school. He said, "Oh, I'm at the top of my class." In reality, he was only in the top 50%. Things like this that almost seem mild and tame for now. But at the time, those were big gaffes, and he's prone to gaffes. He has a filter. Since the 80s, people have said he kind of just blurts out what he thinks, and it's not always tactfully thought out. And I think now that he's in his late 70s, in a different political culture, these gaffes are going to be heightened extremely.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I was just thinking about this is where, a lot of people consider him Uncle Joe, right? And a lot of people think of, oh, it's warm Uncle Joe, blah, blah, blah. But if you really think about what the nickname Uncle Joe, entails, it kind of is just describing your kind of dumb off the rails uncle, right? Like, right. That's what I think about when I hear, oh, it's just Uncle Joe. It's really not a compliment. And I think a lot of people are warm to him and his demeanor. But at the end of the day, like, that's what I want to ask you, and kind of going off that is, I'm just not sure, and I'm curious what you think, if he would actually be a significantly better leader during a pandemic because I think everyone wants him to, they think of him as the safe option, the guy that could bring us back to normalcy. But I don't know. He's the one that's always, trying to fight Trump in cage matches, and he calls out reporters. Like, I don't think he's this perfect, calm, like center unifying character. And like you said, since the 80s, he's been having gaffes, and he still has gaffes, and they've gotten worse, And I read a kind of disturbing Guardian article today before we started recording, and it talks about how the U.S. is on life support. And this is an opinion article, so obviously it's not, facts on the U.S. is on life support, but it talks about how thanks to Trump and this, this disaster in the pandemic, the world is really laughing at us and is really scared of our response and how we're handling this in general. And, it started when Germany was waiting for 200,000 masks, and somehow they went missing in Thailand. And a lot of reports think the U.S. was able to get them first. And we're kind of seeing this U.S. is kind of becoming a wild card player in the world. And I just feel like we need someone who can actually handle a crisis like this better. And I don't know if Biden is the one to bring the United States back to normalcy, or to really help much more than what the administration is now doing, So I'm curious what you think on that. But
look, Biden certainly may not be that unifying, calming figure that we need in a crisis, right? Because you said, he said, that's BS, right to voters' faces. He does kind of get defensive when he's challenged. But I think in terms of this pandemic and a crisis, I don't care if the leader is, you punch me, I punch you back kind of guy. And if it's a pandemic, all I care about is, will the president listen to facts and science and allow the experts to give their expert opinions and go off that? That's all that matters. Right. I don't care about in terms of the pandemic, I don't care about the gaffes. It's only about how much are we willing to listen to real science, not suggestions about third brand off drugs that you get from Fox News. I'm talking about, what do our experts suggest, and allow them to lead the charge, right? Take responsibility. That's another thing too, is taking responsibility. Currently, our president says, I take no responsibility at all, which is the opposite of leadership in a time of a crisis. So yeah, I mean, again, like I'm not trying to, I don't work for Joe Biden, but as far as the pandemic, I would 100% take a Joe Biden over Trump in a pandemic, just because I think that Joe Biden is more willing to listen to science. That's to me is the basic foundation of how to go against a health crisis, is listen to health experts.
No, that's a very fair point, and I full-heartedly agree with that. And it's true. Like, I think the thing that keeps making me feel a little bit better if we had a President Biden is that he would surround himself with good people, and his staff wouldn't be a revolving door that's slowly getting worse and worse in quality and education in the topics, And I mean, a president just needs to be the figurehead of a crisis. It's not like we're asking Joe Biden to go out and make a vaccine.
No, of course not.
But it's true, like you said, he would listen to the experts, and I think that is a crucial thing, because right now we are seeing like a president and an administration that doesn't seem to have a faith in bureaucracy or the federal government or facts, and I think that trifecta is very dangerous. I mean, we have states competing for medical resources. We don't have a good healthcare system. We have chaotic social distancing rules. We have no uniform nationwide plans on a lockdown. Like, this to me is more reminiscent of a poor developing country than an actual, functioning democracy. And so I think you're right, is at least he would do what needs to be done. But also, that being said, I think the elephant in the room with him, though, is that he is having some serious cognitive decline. It's just, at the end of the day, and I mean, I've heard, people talk about Trump in the same way, but I just really don't know if, at least on his side, and I'm not talking about just the crisis now, but just in general, it just kind of concerns me, some of the gaffes he has now, because they're not just oopsie gaffes. Now it seems like there's true memory issues and associating the wrong. I mean, he's called his wife his sister. There's just things that, I mean, they might seem small, but I don't know if you still want the world's leader doing that.
Well, they may seem small if it's just, you had a family gathering and your grandpa's just misnamed someone. Yeah, it's okay. It's just grandpa. It's fine. Everyone does it. But it's not so small when you do it on a grand nationally televised debate stage and Trump is going to dive into it. If you make a mistake, if you say
Yeah.
Trump's gonna dive into any little weakness he can. He's really good at that. I think, and that's one of the problems is, looking back at in like 1988, everyone said that Joe Biden's strong suit was he was a good orator. He was known in the Senate as long-winded, right? He would give long-winded speeches, but they would be powerful and moving, and he would have these crazy lines and like really, he was a powerful orator. He's not now. I don't think he has that same energy. And because of his, he stumbles on words, he misnames things. Even if you have a really well written speech, as soon as you start stumbling a little bit, you lose momentum and you lose that kind of fire and fervent fire behind your speech. He doesn't have that same fire. And so if you look at 1988 and you take away the being a good orator, what do you have left? You have the gaffes, and you don't have much else. So now looking today is, yes, he has more experience. Now he has the experience, right? Because in 88, people said he's so young, he doesn't have a lot of legislative history. Now he does, and he has that experience with Obama, and believe me, that is a big point, and he knows that. That's why he's always talking about when I was in the Obama administration and in the White House. That experience does mean something, but he doesn't have a clear legislative future, right? We have his legislative past, but what's his legislative future? What is he going to push when he is president? I'm not entirely sure. Now that he's not a good speaker either, his strengths are declining and his weaknesses are rising. And I think that Trump, especially when you talk about his gaffes, and we've said this before, I think Trump is going to dominate Biden in the debates.
Mm-hmm. Yes, completely. No, and I think that's a really good point, is when your strengths start disappearing. It's not a good sign, I mean, it's like this isn't a great metaphor, but it's like if you're a great ultramarathon runner and all of a sudden your legs don't work. I mean, sure, I'm sure you're a nice person, but if your strength is gone, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, I think we're in a more unfortunate situation than in 2016. Because we have a pandemic that is kind of taking attention away from this election, and things have changed dramatically. I was talking to some friends last night, and you almost wonder sometimes if people kind of wish they could have this whole last 4 or 5 months over again, because the situation when Biden was first winning primaries was a lot different than what it is now. And so it does make you question, a lot of the candidates that maybe, I think almost all the candidates probably could be a better leader during a time like this than him. And it's just unfortunate that we're in such a tough situation now, and
yeah. Well, it's tough. It's tough for everyone too. I mean, this pandemic might actually, this pandemic could also make or break Trump, right? Yes, right. It's a weird time for everybody because it certainly gets rid of the wind in Joe's sails. Right now, he can't go out and campaign. He can't go out and kiss babies. The whole politics thing. He can't do any of that. But neither can Trump. And of course, now, if this pandemic gets really bad, Trump will be blamed. Even if he says, I have no responsibility, the American people will look at Trump to blame because he's been the guy on TV every single day talking about it. So it could hurt Trump in the end, but you're right that it also hurts Joe's campaign ability. And the one thing that David Axelrod also mentioned was, we may still be quarantined into August, which means there's no Democratic convention. I mean, there would still obviously be the what is it? The actual okay, this is the official, agreement of the party that he's the candidate, right? Like the actual delegates will still vote somehow. But usually the convention is not about it's a formality. It's about the show. It's the showmanship. It's the big parade and you're supposed to start and kick off the general election campaign with this big show and parade to get people behind. It's really important in every single campaign. And if you don't have that big show, it's hard to get momentum. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about even postponing the convention. It is strange, and it's going to upend almost everybody's political strategy.
Right. Right. No, completely. And I think that's why, Biden calls himself a fighter. He kind of has this tough guy image, and he's definitely used it against Trump at times. And I think the only way that he could fight fire with fire, I guess, in this would be to emphasize some of the bad things that the Trump administration, and more specifically Donald Trump, have been doing lately. And because I agree with you, especially if the convention is not officially the way it usually is, it's going to be a tough bounce back.
Yeah.
And foreshadowing wise, it's kind of weird. I read a book last summer called The Fifth Risk, which is a really good book about how it basically looks into the Trump administration and their negligence toward bureaucracy and their lack of expertise in putting people into these positions is the fifth risk, as they call it, where it's all these little tiny issues and these little tiny things that no one thinks about that are slowly compounding. And I think the pandemic is highlighting one of my biggest fears about the administration, and it's just that they have understaffed all these different bureaucratic institutions and haven't even put experts in it. And we're starting to see that with the pandemic, as obviously we were not prepared. We had cut our epidemic research and other things such as that. And I think it's highlighting the fact that this government right now doesn't seem to care about the small details. And the fifth risk is kind of these small details that compound over time, It's like the EPA. If you keep cutting spending to the EPA and there's a big spill, maybe no one talks about it now, but 20 years down the road, we can see some serious issues. And we're kind of seeing that with this pandemic now. No one really cared about it because it wasn't in our faces. And I think that's the administration's biggest flaw. And if Biden could emphasize that, I think we could be, it could be good for him. I mean, also the Guardian just reported, I think it was yesterday, that Trump has ousted two of the well-respected IGs, which are actually looking over the president and watching the executive branch to function. And Trump has appointed Brian Miller, who's a White House lawyer, which is unprecedented. It's basically picking one of your own friends to run something that's supposed to check you. And I just wish that Biden was actually fighting these type of things more. Actually telling the American people, yeah, this president is not prepared for this. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he clearly plays against the rules in his own gain, and I just think Biden doesn't have the fight left in him to do it, and that's what worries me.
Well, he's certainly trying, because if you just go to Joe Biden's website, I mean, the first thing he does is, he says like donate, right? And then after you click, okay, I don't want to donate, I just want to see what you're about. The first thing he shows is Joe's leadership during the COVID pandemic. So I do think his campaign understands that Trump's weak point is his leadership and his response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Like you said, I mean, there's like half of the federal bureaucracies are left with acting directors or even completely empty offices. You're right. Like, our federal government is completely understaffed, and I think that's intentional because it's less oversight and less accountability. And Trump doesn't like oversight and accountability. That's why he puts his friends in positions. So yes, like, there's a very glaring weakness in the Trump administration's bureaucratic response to this pandemic. And I do think Biden is trying to capitalize on that. Because again, you go to his website, the first thing he says is Joe's leadership during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's big, bold. It's the first problem that pops up. So at least his web team is going against is trying to capitalize on it. Yeah, I mean, again, like, this COVID-19 pandemic is a make or break moment, I think, for Trump. We'll see if he's able to weather the storm. So back to the point of what Biden should focus on and what he shouldn't. I think he should focus on Trump's leadership or lack of leadership during the COVID-19 pandemic. Things he can't attack on would be kind of nepotism, right? One of the criticisms from Trump is, Jared Kushner's in charge of things and his daughter's in charge of things. Why? Just because they're family. So nepotism. Well, Joe Biden can't really attack that too much because the Hunter Biden thing will come right back in his face. Another thing Joe Biden can't attack Trump for is behavior with women. You know what I mean? You can't talk about the Hollywood, grab him by the pussy tape if now you also have a credible allegation from Tara Reid that, you sexually assaulted her. So there are things now that there are things now that would have been so easy for someone like Bernie Sanders to hammer home against Trump. Nepotism, treatment of women. Like, this guy is, basically Bernie Sanders could have painted Trump as a scumbag. Joe Biden can't do that because all Trump would have to do is, you're a scumbag too. What about Tara Reade? What about Hunter Biden? So now you have this problem where you almost eliminate these opportunities to attack Trump because your candidate is hypocritical.
That's a very good point. And I think, again, that's why Trump is going to eat Biden alive, because Trump doesn't give an F. He doesn't
really
give
doesn't.
an F. And Biden's walking on glass.
Yeah.
Like, you have to balance this woke left with this center who probably doesn't care as much, but you have to balance it out with the loudest people on the left. And we've already seen that he's not very popular with younger voters. And you're right, he can't do a lot of the fighting that I think most of the other candidates before. And That's why this is the hypothetical I want to ask you, is because I've been seeing more in gossip pieces and local magazines. Like, I think the Boston Herald talked about it a little bit, but I think some people wished that they could replace Biden before the convention. We've been seeing governors like Cuomo step up. And to be honest, I've talked to a lot of family and friends, and all of us agree on the same thing. We're like, you know what? Maybe I don't like their politics, but Gavin Newsom, Governor Cuomo, these
Gretchen
Inslee
Whitmer
in Washington. Yes. Exactly. Like, right and left, there have been some champions of this on a leadership level in the states. And a lot of us kind of go, dang, like, what if Cuomo was an option? And like, would that even be possible? And because I do think a lot of people are second guessing Biden as the nominee.
Oh, certainly. I think, though, that, the possibility of that happening is pretty slim. But yeah, again, like how I talked about earlier, 50% enthusiasm is not good. If half your voters are like, yeah, I guess I just have to vote for you, I don't know. That's not good, right? That doesn't bode well for getting people to go out to the polls. Again, I've talked about this before in other podcasts. 2016 was not because Trump got a wave of new voters. It was because Democratic voters that previously voted for Obama didn't vote for Clinton in key states, right? It was a lack of enthusiasm for one side, and then Trump just capitalized on it. That's another problem we're going to have again this time. So to wrap this episode up, I think we should talk about VP picks, right? Because Biden has to know that these problems, he's got all these pollsters and the whole apparatus telling him the same things we're talking about. You need enthusiasm. You need young people. You need minorities. You need to build this coalition now, because because the general is all about having a coalition. So who do you think he should choose as a VP? Now, he's already promised it'll be a woman. Who do you think it's going to be, or should be, to help build that coalition he needs to beat Trump in November?
Okay. So first off, I don't like the fact that he said it's going to have to be a woman. I think that's a hefty promise. And I don't like the identity politics side of saying, if I'm president, I'm going to pick a woman. I think it almost weighs you down, because what happens, I think the main issue with this VP thing is he needs to pick someone that is going to excite people. But the problem is, if you pick a progressive like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie, for example, yes, you're going to get more Bernie bros and Elizabeth Warren supporters, but then you're also going to alienate the center. So then if you go with, I don't know, an Amy Klobuchar or, an Andrew Yang, obviously I don't think that would happen, or a Buttigieg, that's a better one. Then yes, you'll probably help get moderates, but then are you going to alienate the progressives? And so I think, like we've been talking about, the party is in such a fractured moment that one person's dream VP candidate is another person's nightmare.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, man. I really don't. I personally, my own opinion is I think he needs someone that's quick speaking, energetic, and can kind of make up for his shortfalls. I've always thought that Buttigieg should be the man with him, because he's a moderate, he's young, he's smart, and yes, he lacks an experience. But if he had 4 years working with Biden, what if Biden was a one-term president? maybe Buttigieg picks up the reins and runs after that. I
Right.
think this would be what Buttigieg needs to continue a political career: experience.
Right. Well, it's not going to happen because Buttigieg again is a
No.
man. Is a man. It's a weird. It's a weird identity politics thing. I think that Biden made that promise to get ahead of Bernie. Right. He made that promise when Bernie was still in the race, and he needed to like kind of win the wokeism. So he was before Bernie even mentioned a VP. He was like, I'm picking a woman, and so he wanted to win that quote unquote battle. Now he has to stick to that, and of course there are plenty of good women candidates. Don't get me wrong, but it is a strange point that he made the promise that it would be a woman. I think that is an interesting identity politics admission, but that's where we are. So looking at the women, you're right that like Elizabeth Warren would help him with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party that I think almost despise Biden. If you look at some of the YouTube comments on some of Biden's videos, I mean, people really hate him, especially on the left, like even on the left.
Yeah.
So a Warren would help that out, but like you said, political realities. Does he need Bernie Bros in California? Not really. He needs people in Michigan and Wisconsin and the Midwest. Klobuchar, I think, Klobuchar is probably the most politically strategic choice. But
Yes.
she also doesn't have a lot of enthusiasm from her supporters, I don't think. I think a good middle ground and someone that has risen recently as being a leader in the pandemic crisis is Gretchen Whitmer, which is the current governor of Michigan. She's a Democratic governor. She's been pretty pretty outspoken against Trump. As far as Trump's leadership during the COVID crisis, and she's been trying to prop herself up, similar to Cuomo, like you mentioned, as if the federal government's not going to take the reins, I am, and I'm going to make sure that my citizens in my state are safe and healthy. Right? That's at least their message they're trying to get out. And so I think someone like Gretchen Whitmer would be a kind of a fresh face and a new leader that could really prop Biden up. And again, Michigan, a key state that he's going to need in November, as well as surrounding states like Ohio and Wisconsin. So I can see actually a Gretchen Whitmer or a Klobuchar as being the politically the smartest bet. But we'll see where he goes. Any last words before we wrap this up?
No, yeah, I guess, yeah. Well, one last word is first off, I think you're correct. I've told people for a long time that I would vote for Klobuchar. She was one of my top choices. I like her, but you're right. She's not flashy, and we like things that are flashy.
Yeah.
But you're right. That same 538 study did say that Biden basically is just going to need to do a trade-off where he may lose some youth turnout, but he needs the suburban moderates. And you're right. I think either one of those ladies would be a really good option for him. And just to wrap this up, I think I think the whole debate in the country right now, and we're seeing it kind of pan out during this pandemic, is small versus big government. And I think Biden needs to remind Americans that a crisis needs a federal response. I think that's why Trump and his administration have been reluctant to use the National Defense Act. I think that's why they've been hesitant to do a nationwide lockdown, because they don't want to bolster the Fed. They don't want it to look like the Fed is good at being strong. And I think Biden needs to remind Americans that right now we need someone who has faith in our institutions and our government, in a big government, not letting states do what they want or fight over resources and turn the country into the Wild West. And, I think he's going to be good at that. So it's going to be interesting. But I think you're right. The VP is going to be important. And it's going to need to be very important.
What do you think, listeners out there to the Tonic Accord? Who do you foresee Biden picking as a VP? Do you think Biden has the leadership abilities to kind of take on Trump? Do you think that he'll capitalize on this pandemic? Or vice versa? Do you think Trump will be able to kind of smack Biden around with Biden's gaffes and whatnot? It's going to be very interesting to see. A lot is up in the air. This pandemic has kind of completely changed the political landscape and the possibilities of what could happen. It's almost incredibly hard to predict what will happen, but we'd love to hear your opinions and your thoughts. And as always, you can find us many podcast sites online: Podbean, Apple Podcast. We do upload to YouTube all of our episodes, including these short catching up ones. So please stay tuned. Please let us know your thoughts. And as always, thank you for listening.
And wish me luck. I'm running a half marathon in my garden tomorrow.
Okay. Well, I'll wish you luck. I have seen your videos of the garden runs. Hey, you got to do what you got to do, man. Everyone's hustling in this pandemic. All right. Take care, folks. Thanks again.